I am forever thine. How long I waited for thee, I cannot say, for time was not in my thought. When I watch for thee, my mind is merged in thee. Time exists not for me when thou art near. I see not else but thee, I feel not else but thee, I crave no other knowledge, I only know thou art mine, and I am forever thine, and I am forever thine.
In solitude, in most stillness, there is a sacred shrine. Divine harmony sings there, peace perpetual reigns there, pure gladness shines there, sweet fragrance permeates the air, but none can find access there whose inner eyes are closed, nor can one enter there whose footsteps are heavy and hard. In solitude, in most stillness, there is a sacred shrine.
Om Sachidananda Sharanam. Om Shri Guru Kripahi Kevalam. Om Shri Guru Sharanagato. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Mama.
This month the theme is humility, simplicity, and purity of heart. And this is certainly something we should all aspire to. I hope that you've spent some time this month lightening your load, whether it's possessions or it's certain burdens that you've been carrying around a long time, emotionally, psychologically, mentally. Certainly lightening the load physically in terms of our environment is a huge help, because it is absolutely true that simplicity is having order in our lives, and having a simpler environment is so helpful to us psychologically and mentally. Swami Paramananda asked the question, what is a disciple? And in our tradition, and in many traditions, and in all traditions, discipleship is a very important role. We all have to learn to be good disciples before we can be leaders or teachers or guides of other people. And we know this practically in our regular lives when we think in terms of apprenticeships, that it is always important for any skilled person to have been an assistant to someone who is skillful in that particular endeavor. And we see that in medicine with internships and residencies, where young doctors who have gone through years of training have to go through years more of being an apprentice, of being on call 24 hours a day for 2 or 3 years before they're entrusted with independence in the healing arts and skills. The same is true in music and in science and in the arts and across the board. We need a teacher who is an example of that which we are trying to learn. Of course, the incarnations of God are examples to us of how to live skillfully on this earth, and what are the important values to the divine. The incarnations embody those qualities, and a way of being, and an attitude toward life, and a way of relating to other living beings. When Swami Paramananda was born, he was born into an ancient culture in India, and the tradition of the guru and disciple was fundamental. For most of ancient times, it was the exclusive purview of young men, of young boys, and not girls or women. In some places it was women who had women gurus, enlightened, illumined souls, as their teachers. The ashram was the fundamental educational structure. And young people were taught first by their parents as their first teachers, and then they were sent to an ashram to live with a family. The guru could be either the father or the mother, whichever was the illumined soul, and the young boy or girl would have not only secular learning, but more important than that, spiritual learning and character building. Swami Paramananda wrote, "The teacher was a specialist who knew how to give proper direction to the thoughts and habits of the students so that they might learn how to control rising emotions, temper, and misguided zeal. Naturally, this necessitated a certain amount of bodily and mental discipline. Until this control is learned, we accomplish little." He went on to say one of the first things given the students was to do menial work. They were asked to gather fuel and were expected to do it regularly. If they had to be reminded, it meant that they were failing in their discipleship. Thus, it was needful for them to always be on the alert. In the days of my training, says Swamiji, I had to train my mind to awaken at a certain hour. I was expected to get up at 4 a.m., but I used to arise before that. I have been ever grateful for these early days. I would not exchange them for anything in the world. This form of discipline cultivates habits that are essential to true accomplishment and abolishes certain bad habits which create bondage. So how wonderful to have an opportunity to begin aright instead of unlearning bad habits that we develop over time. Swami Paramananda had this training, of course, with his own grandfather, and then he went on to, as a 17-year-old young man, to be under the watchful care of Swami Vivekananda, Swami Brahmananda, and Swami Ramakrishnananda, who was his main guru for training for 6 years, and taught him not only secular subjects, but also the most important spiritual foundation. He instructed him in the Upanishads, he taught him Sanskrit, he taught him how to chant, how to meditate, how to live the spiritual life. How wonderful to be 24 hours, 7 days a week with an illumined master, as Swami Ramakrishnananda certainly was. Swami Paramananda said that the definition of a disciple is a follower of truth, with a capital T. And the purpose of the period of discipleship, but we all, as we'll see as we go forward, we all remain disciples all of our lives, all of our spiritual lives. It helps so much to have the opportunity to be trained by someone who is also trained, who also has experience and knows how to guide and help us along the way, so that we're not reinventing the wheel, and so that we're not going off in directions that are not fruitful to us. But the purpose of discipleship is to learn to train our minds to move in a certain direction, in a certain channel, in order to guide our conduct until our character is established and strong. You see, everything about spiritual life is about our character. That's who we are as a human being, who we are as a soul. And in spiritual, if we think we have spiritual aspirations, we cannot get to step 1 or 2 if we don't have good character. It absolutely requires good character as the essential foundation. And we'll talk about that more. The essential qualities of a disciple, of a true disciple, are humility, a yearning for truth or the divine, resolution to be determined, and strength. You see, we can't be weak in spiritual life. We can't be a weak personality. We have to be strong. Swami Paramananda said that the essential of our spiritual life the fundamental wellspring of our spiritual life is the ability to follow a principle and dedicate our entire lives, consecrate ourselves to that principle, to be able to follow it and to be able to dedicate ourselves to that principle. What happens to most of us is we're just all over the place. We just don't accomplish because we're not dedicated, we're not focused, we've talked over the last several weeks about having one fundamental spiritual principle that we make the lodestar of all of our decisions, of the way we live our life, of the choices we make about our lives. We certainly theoretically subscribe to a lot of different spiritual principles, but we don't follow one of them to completion and make our lives about that. That's what it's all about. For example, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. That means that we have to be an instrument. An instrument is something that's played by someone else. An instrument is something that allows itself to be used. And of course, the master musician is the divine. So we have to have a principle. We are the instrument. And if our principle is that I want to be an instrument of peace, of divine peace, not peace at any cost, but peace, then I have to do the inner work to make very sure that all aspects of myself have peace, that my issues are resolved. My psychological issues, my mental issues, my emotional issues, my physical issues. I have to know myself. As Saint Teresa said, with every bite we eat, we must have self-knowledge. Or Swami Paramananda's guiding principle was love will conquer. Loving kindness conquers everything. And he put that into practice no matter what came at him. No matter how unkind or hostile or dishonest or obnoxious people were. And you think he had a charmed life and there were none of those people in his life? That's ridiculous. He faced everything every one of us has to face in terms of life arising and different personalities coming into his life and having impact on the life of he himself and of the community and of the society in which he lived. But his guiding principle, that one he chose, or that chose him, was love will conquer. Loving kindness conquers everything. And so our whole spiritual life depends on our learning how to follow, to be able to follow the principle we choose and to apply it to every single thing that comes up in our lives. When we say we're a disciple or we enter the spiritual journey seriously, then we have to live the life. We have to live it. We can't dabble with it or play with it or be hypocrites and talk a good talk and put up a good show and not live it on every level of our being. Swami Paramananda said, we have to live the life and we have to give up just talking about it or just theorizing about it. The word disciple means discipline. It doesn't just mean that we follow someone else. We talk about Christ's disciples. In the Indian tradition and in the Christian tradition and in the Muslim tradition and in the Native American tradition, the Buddhist tradition, we have a master or a guru and we have disciples. It's boot camp, it's training, It's opportunity to practice. And the practice prepares us for the real discipleship, which is learning to surrender to the divine. To be able to be so relieved of our own selfishness and our own self-centeredness and our own selfish agenda, no matter how noble it seems to us. That when God calls us, in whichever way and however, at any given moment, we can move. We can actually move out of our own concepts and our own idea of what is my idea of what is right and correct. But that has to be based on a principle, on a foundation of good character. But we have to be able to, we don't know when we surrender ourselves to discipleship under the divine, when our own idiosyncrasies are cleared away as best they can so that we're not an obstacle to light, and we're not an obstacle ourselves to guidance, that the mess inside of us is so loud that we can't even perceive the divine's guidance. That's the pruning, that's the elimination that we are accomplishing through our austerities, through our spiritual practices, through our spiritual training, our own selfishness, our own self-will, our own agenda for our little lives that makes us ill-prepared to play our part in a larger plan, a vaster vision, the divine plan. We have to be ready at a moment's notice to do whatever we're called upon to do, no matter how menial it may seem to us. That's our training, to be able to do what's asked us to do, without always knowing better. See, it's a razor's edge, isn't it? Because we're not asked to give up our individuality, our common sense, our intelligence. At the same time, we have to surrender, and we have to be ready to do what the divine says in an instant. Swami Paramananda says we always have to keep our kit ready, have to keep our bags packed. We have to keep our unsui quality, that quality of being a cloud. We're not so planted in our own concepts that we're not able to move when we're asked to move, that we're unable to be flexible. And that brings us to humility. We know that, if we ask someone, are you humble? And they answer yes, you have to have real concern. Because a person who's truly humble doesn't know they're humble. It's one of those qualities you can't work on. Because there's a fine line between having true humility and being a doormat and having self-deprecation and feeling of worthlessness, and that who you are doesn't matter and doesn't count. See, spirituality is always the razor's edge. You're the most magnificent, important being in the entire world. Your parents are the divine. You are an instrument for the divine. Your body is a temple for the divine. And yet we're saying it's important to also be selfless. and not self-centered. To have a true sense of your worth without the immature ego. Having, as Sri Ramakrishna said, a ripe ego, a mature ego. An ego that's based upon wholeness, that our physical and our emotional and our mental and our spiritual being is one. That's when we have peace. If all of the aspects of ourselves are at war on some level, whether we're conscious of it or not, or it's happening in our subconscious or our unconscious, all of that has to be brought to the surface. That's why when a guru gives us a mantra, the guru's mantra has a very important power. And that is that it begins to bring the subconscious to consciousness. It has a very important housekeeping function. Therefore, that mantra that is given is both a seed and a means for purification and an avenue for power, spiritual power. In the Bhagavad Gita, which is India's really most important scripture, in many ways the most known one. It's 18 chapters that were placed in the middle of one of India's great epic poems. And it's just a little jewel just plopped right in the middle of it. And it is, the metaphor is war. And the chief characters are Krishna, who's a charioteer, and Arjuna, who is a noble prince. They represent, first of all, the enlightened teacher, the guru, the master, the spiritual master, and also God, who is the ultimate guru and spiritual master, and Arjuna, who was a truly qualified disciple. Not a beginning disciple, a qualified disciple. The metaphor is war, but the structure is all about how we live our lives skillfully. It's all about life and the issues that arise and the questions that arise philosophically and practically and spiritually, and the conundrums that we face and the ambivalent, ambiguous circumstances that arise in our lives, where it's hard to discern what to do, what our choices are, and what we must do. So all 18 chapters are the teacher's answers to Arjuna's questions about life, about reality, with a capital R, about the divine, about our relationship to the divine, about issues that arise universally in everyone's life. The Bhagavad Gita was never intended to be for Hindus only. And that's why its appeal is so universal. So anyway, there's a big battle. The biggest battle of the war is tomorrow morning. And Arjuna, who's the leader, commander of one side, looks out on the battlefield and he sees that on both sides There are beloved family members and friends and comrades and mentors, people he loves and people he respects. So it isn't such an easy thing, like everyone on that side of the line is the other, anonymous, nameless, I can do my duty and just wipe them out. And all of us are on the side of righteousness. It just is not an easy answer. And what Arjuna wants to do is turn tail and run. He doesn't want to be the commander. He doesn't want to lead his troops into this battle. He doesn't want to fight this battle. He doesn't know what to do, so he's torn between duty and what he sees and what he perceives and what he feels. And how often that happens to us sometimes in big, huge, difficult moments. How do I behave? What elements of this, there are things on both sides of it. It's just not an either this is right and this is wrong kind of a decision. It's not clear cut. So in that moment of absolute emptiness, see, that's the secret, emptiness. He wasn't filled with his own ideas of righteousness. I mean, he'd been trained. This is your duty. You're a soldier. You come from a noble family. Your side of the family, your side of the line has been wronged. Everybody can know that. Your mother has been shamed. But he was empty. He came in all humility. Silence of self. And he said to Krishna, his charioteer, not knowing at the time that his charioteer was really God, who's the charioteer of all of us. He said, "O wise one, I know not what to do in this terrible situation which confronts me. Therefore, as a humble disciple, a truth seeker, I come to you. I take refuge in you. Do thou instruct me." See, one of the main conditions that we bring to our discipleship is this ability to learn, this desire to learn, this conviction that we're always a learner, that we never have arrived in terms of our learning. Because if we think we know everything, we can learn nothing. If we think we don't need to learn, then we simply can't learn. Sri Ramakrishna said, every day, each and every day, I learn. He always looked for things to learn each day. The other quality that we have that's part of humility is this tremendous yearning for truth, this yearning for God that makes us feel that we're willing to do whatever it takes to attain truth. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs us. It's this determination. It's this resolution. It's this steadfastness. It's this perseverance that allows us to overcome all obstacles. We discover we can do all kinds of things that we never even thought that we could do. humility, having the attitude that I come to serve. Put me to work, whatever you need me to do. To be able to serve, to have the attitude of being willing to serve in any capacity that's needed. See, that's the ticket with surrender to the divine. To be willing to serve in whatever capacity is needed. Not what I think is needed, what the divine thinks is needed. Not my will, but thine be done. That's what the disciple Christ followed with his master, his Father. This is what we aspire to follow. And then we have self-mastery. There are a couple of purposes for which we came to this earth. One is to realize our own divine nature, to realize, to make real, to experience for ourselves our oneness with the divine. All of the incarnations, Christ and the Buddha, all of the great spiritual teachers have realized this for themselves. And it's not for them to give us this experience. It is for each of us to do what's necessary to have the experience for ourselves. That's the reason that we have come to birth here on this earth, to help us along the way, to help us do what's necessary, to experience all the things we need to learn in order to be able to clear away the debris to the union that's already present in the depth of our being, to unkink the hose of divine grace, you might say. So self-mastery means that we have to learn to master our own physical instrument, our own physical bodies. Cannot give in to its cravings and its own sense of license just because it has desires. We have to learn moderation. We have to care for it like we would a toddler. Keep it healthy. Not be fanatic one way or the other in self-indulgence or austerity, punishing the body. It has to be the middle path of wisdom, but we have to master that physical body. It is an instrument. It's not something that is to guide us around by the nose. We have to master our minds, our thought processes, our emotions. We have to know how to deal with them and work with them wisely. We have to learn to deal with the subconscious content when it arises, which will then begin to unlock some of those concretized, unconscious patterns that we have, all brought to light. If we think that we're on the spiritual journey and we can cut corners, we can't. We can't be dishonest in business or in our relationships. We can't lie and cheat and steal. We have to have integrity. We have to be men and women of truthfulness. If we have any hypocrisy in us, then we must root out whatever it is that we're being deceptive about. A moral, and ethical foundation of integrity is the sine qua non, without which nothing. We have to learn to be enduring. We have to learn to persevere and be steadfast, because steadfastness and perseverance wins the race. We have to have a sense of humor about ourselves, most of all, because we really are pretty ridiculous and funny. Especially when others look at us. Mataji used to say all the time to us, quoting Ralph Waldo Emerson, "What you are speaks so loudly I can't hear a word you say." That's our character that speaks. And our conduct reflects our character, who and what we are. So if we have weak bricks in our character, then those things that are obvious things that we have to work on and develop and practice. Everything depends upon practice. We may fail many times in our practice, but the point is, why steadfastness and perseverance is so important is that we say, okay, I failed at that, I get back on and I start practicing it again. And again, and again, and again, and even if it takes a lifetime of practice. Someone once asked me in the line, is it all right if I cheat on my taxes? And I said, not if you're aspiring spiritually. If we're aspiring spiritually, we can't cheat on anything. Even if we don't get caught. Our own inner being catches us out all the time, that kind of hypocrisy. In spiritual journey, we're aspiring to transparency, that the light may shine and radiate through us, that we are what we seem. And so our spiritual practice is there in order to make that possible. When I talked in the beginning about the guru-disciple relationship and the training that Swami Paramananda had in India and that young people have had for thousands of years, beginning always with menial work. There's no such thing as menial work. Most of our lives are doing menial work. We say, well, I don't like to clean. So what? So what? If the divine plan is based upon me cleaning bathrooms, then that's not menial work. It is our practice. It is our spiritual expression. It's the attitude toward which we approach every single thing we have to do during the day. So whether it's menial work, whatever that is, which means everyday stuff that has to be done, which every animal and bird does. They clean out their areas. Whatever menial work we do is as important as worshiping in the shrine. Who are we to decide what's higher and lower when it is what we bring to that, everything we do, as important, significant, and holy, and sacred. You see, in spiritual life, there's no division between secular and religious or spiritual. Our relationships and the way we treat one another is as important as the way we treat God or the way we treat our teacher, or our master, our spiritual mentor. The way we treat the others, the way we treat the least, they're not the least, is how we really are. That's our character. We may bring out our best to a person we admire and revere, but it's how we treat everyone that's the real person that we are. So you see, in spiritual life, everything is important. Every interaction is important. Every interaction is one with the divine, because every one of us is a manifestation of the divine. The divine is within each and every one of us. And so, whatever we are called upon to do, to play our part, we bring to each task respect. We bring to each task our wholeheartedness. Doesn't matter whether we like to do it or not. It's that we do it with respect and to the very 100% of our best ability we bring to it, and we offer it as a sacrament, as a spiritual offering. So does it matter if we're cleaning out the toilet, or we're vacuuming a room, or we're gardening, or we're writing a book, or we're preparing for the shrine, or we're taking care of a baby, or feeding the dog, or picking up its poop? It's how do we approach it? What is our attitude? And our attitude should be uniform. It doesn't vary between what we're asked to do. How can the divine possibly use us if the divine has a checklist of what we like to do and what we don't like to do? The divine says the need is here. We've already checked that we don't like to do that because it's beneath us, or we're lazy or something. Or we think it's not so important, or it's insignificant, or nobody's going to notice, or who cares. It's one of the training that Swami Paramananda gave the community. That's why he was so insistent upon order and carefulness. That's our Zen practice. How do we close the curtains in the chatter room? Are they just left any other way? No, they should be closed when we leave. How is the door to the chatter room left? Is it all the way open, all the way closed? No, it's open about 6 inches. That's the tradition. Do we pick up incense dust in front of the deities? Yes. Is the house ready for company at any time? Yes. Because we never know when the divine's going to come and visit us. Is our room to be as in order and neat and clean as the shrine? Yes. We never know when the divine is going to come and visit us. When Mataji went to bed at night, she always buttoned the top button of her pajamas. She always fixed her hair just so, because she never knew if the divine would come in the night. And he did, actually. When the fireman had to come and take her out of her room in the middle of the night, her pajama top was buttoned and her hair was just so. Now that may seem a little extreme, but that was Mataji, because she lived in the habitual presence of the divine. And she did everything, from cleaning toilets, to cooking, to keeping her things neat and in order, to keeping her relationships neat and in order. But her first priority was always the divine. And the divine was manifested in all of us and in everything she owned which she didn't consider owning herself, but that were in her care, let's put it that way. Every moment was mindfulness of the sacredness of that moment and whatever she was doing. So I've seen it, I've lived with it for 15 years with her. I aspire to it. And so, self-mastery, self-discipline, neither being fanatic and neither being self-indulgent. Always the middle path. Learning to persevere, to stick to it, to stick to the practice, because most spiritual practice is very mundane and menial. But it is the perseverance and the steadfastness that help us to arrive, whatever arrival is. And finally, truthfulness. Several years ago, we studied the Chandogya Upanishad, and you'll remember Satyakama. Satyakama presented himself to an illumined soul and asked to be his disciple. And in those particular ancient times, you had to be a Brahmin to be accepted. Now, Brahmins were the highest caste in this four-caste system. Brahmins weren't necessarily wealthy, but their role was to be the philosophers, the spiritual leaders, the priests. And so the first thing the Guru asked was, what is your family? What's your background? In other words, are you a Brahmin? And Satyakama said, I don't know my family. He said, when my mother was young, she told me that she traveled with a family, a wealthy family, as a servant. And I was conceived during that time. So I don't know who my family is. My mother said to me, your name is Satyakama. And the Guru said to him, whatever your family is, you are a true Brahmin. Because a true Brahmin, the meaning of being a true Brahmin is a lover and follower of truth. And the Guru went on to say, I accept you as my disciple. I will initiate you tomorrow, tonight, the rest of the day, go and gather firewood. See, that was the menial task that was always given to the youngest disciples, because there was always a fire on the altar, like our vigil. It was a small fire, and it had to be fed with twigs 24 hours a day in order to keep it going. And it was the job of the youngest disciple to 24 hours a day make sure that fire didn't go out. Mataji had that same discipline for us who were in her training, and that is that we had a vigil on the mantelpiece in the living room. It was a candle that was not electric. And we could not use a new one there, we had to use a used one. And it was the Shriner's responsibility for 24 hours to make sure that vigil didn't go out. And you were to burn it down without letting it go out. So you had to be alert and aware without being reminded you were responsible. And if that candle went out, it was very inauspicious. It was also very inauspicious on how serious we were about our degree of commitment and mindfulness. And so Satyakama told the truth, even though it undoubtedly would have meant that he would be rejected for discipleship because he was not a Brahmin. But obviously, the Guru put truthfulness as the most important quality. You see, Sri Ramakrishna said, for this age, truthfulness is he said it was the spiritual practice for this age. There are many spiritual practices, but so important, especially for this age, that we have to be truthful even if we become bare and vulnerable because we have told the truth. So Swami Paramananda says truth with a capital T comes to us when we are able to surmount our selfish ambitions, our sense of competition with other people, that one-upmanship that we have, that zero-sum game type of thing. And we overcome our selfishness, we overcome our vanities, and we overcome our smallness. This morning, the opening music that you heard was Krishna Sadhika singing How Long I Waited for Thee. And the closing music will be Joy Ram and the choir singing You Call Out the Day. This coming Wednesday is Buddha Purnima, Buddha's birthday, the day he was born. He was born on the full moon of May. He achieved his enlightenment on the full moon of May, and he gave up his body also on the full moon of May. And so it's a very special time. It's also a time when the Buddha himself is very close to the earth consciousness. And the day before the full moon of May, which is on Wednesday, is a very propitious time for meditation. And also, of course, on Wednesday and also on Thursday. So we will be having the Buddha's service. It will be available to you on Thursday afternoon. So I hope you'll join us for that. We'll not be having an additional service next Sunday. So the service for Buddha's birthday will be our service for the week. So please join us for that. It'll be available to you on Thursday afternoon. So the next Sunday service will be on June 6th. And we hope you'll be right here, same time, same channel, right with us here in the Vedanta Center Temple. Please watch our website and watch these services and watch for any announcements, because the time that for our controlled first steps in opening and having our services here in the temple is sooner rather than later. So keep an eye out on the website for any announcements that will be forthcoming. Today's daily thought is the aim of all spiritual teaching is to make us loving, pure, humble, and unselfish. And the lines to memorize from one of Swami Paramananda's poems is altar flower. That's the flower that's offered on the altar in worship. I have watched you with deepest wonderment, fragrant beauty of delicate loveliness. You have given your all. Now you're fading. Now you are risen to your real glory. You are ascended. Religions do not differ fundamentally one from the other. They all point the way upward, Godward. They tell us never to be afraid, to lift up our head to God. They strive to give us a greater vision, to make us forget our smallness, and to realize our divine inheritance. They show us the way to attain true fulfillment. They say we must cease to cling to the little notion of I and mine, and cultivate humility and simplicity. And the prayer, in this hour of worship, I gather up my thought, and lay them at your feet, my loving Mother. Lend me your tender protection. Lead me in the path of humility and unselfishness. Protect me from all ignorance. And enfold me with your holy peace. May God the Absolute, one without a second, the one in whom we live and move and have our being, the one God who is called by many names, Christ of the Christians, Allah of the Muslims, Hashem of the Jewish people, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, Buddha of the Buddhists, Shangdi of the Chinese, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, Brahman, the Divine Mother, the Infinite and All-Abiding Spirit of the Hindus. May you, who are our Mother, Father, Friend, Beloved, Companion, and Guide, grant unto us all peace and blessing. Peace, peace, peace be unto us and unto all living beings.
I feel I'll come to know you well, and love is growing. You smile and the sun obeys. You call out the day. Friend, you are mellow-hearted, feeler of sorrows, mystic dancer, sweet enchanter. You call out the day. I feel I'll come to know you well, and love is growing. You cast your net and caught my heart, caught heart and soul. Prince, you are a glow. star, maker of seasons, gentle lamb, lion man, you call out the day. You call out the day. You call out the day. I feel I'll come to know you well, and love is growing. You smile and the sun obeys. You call out the day. Friend, you are mellow-hearted, feeler of sorrows, mystic dancer, sweet enchanter. You call out the day. I feel I'll come to know you well, and love is growing. You cast your net and caught my heart, caught heart and soul. Prince, you are a glowing star, maker of seasons, gentle lamb, lion man, you call out the day. You call out the day. You call out the day. I feel I'll come to know you well. I feel I'll come to know you well. I feel